Here is a quick overview of ethical test preparation practices that should save you from having to read a chapter and listen to a longer lecture. I've boiled it down into just a couple slides that I hope I can cover in 10 minutes. So, first of all, we think about ethical concerns because we think back to when accountability was first starting to become a thing because more and more money was being put into public education. It became a requirement up to a certain age, right? These are all things that didn't exist when this country first began. So everybody ultimately had to prove that they were actually educating students. Um, this was all fine and dandy until the 80s when a big report came out about how standards weren't being met. And ever since then, people have tried all sorts of things, punishments, rewards, threats, incentives, to try to raise academic performance in schools, even though the schools by themselves aren't really the issue. It's more the culture and the problems with poverty in our country. Now, when we think about how high stakes testing came along and developed, there have been a lot of negative impacts. You have things like increased stress in students across the whole age spectrum, actually. A few years ago, when high stakes testing was really at a fever pitch, there were, first graders, second graders, and their parents complaining about how much pressure was being put on them to do well on these things. As we go through the past couple of years, I think people have been easing off a bit, but there still is some serious pressure. The real pressure from a few years ago came because No Child Left Behind, which required all schools, public schools, to have all students proficient or better, really set out impossible goals that cannot be met because of the way academic standards are developed, how they're used. It's unlikely that we will ever have everyone passing the standards unless we make them so simple that even somebody who is living in the most terrible of situations could walk over that bar. So a couple other things happen. One, teaching to the test, where you modify your curriculum to just mirror what the test is doing based on what's been asked in the past. Other people actually shipped kids away, either excused them from testing, had them go on a field trip, or said they were absent, lying and cheating like that, or they over-identified them and said that they were in need of special services based on whatever assessments were approved at the time. This doesn't happen as much anymore, but it's what happened. You also had back in 2009, and they were sentenced in 2015, cheating in Atlanta, Chicago were the two biggest ones. There were reports in New York and DC as well. But the most famous one was the Atlanta public schools cheating scandal, where the majority of the schools were involved in some sort of cheating, meaning that teachers were basically changing the answers that students were giving them when they were left alone with the tests. And they were finally sentenced on defrauding the public because they had performance bonuses tied to incentives. These things that really happened. Some of them were sentenced to 25 years in prison for what they did. Principals were involved, and most often it was started by the principal, many teachers, many other administrative assistants as well. So it's a real issue. And you may be asked to do some questionable things during your time in field, during your time as a student teacher and as a teacher. I remember one of the people who went into student teaching came up to me and told me that during the district test, not the state one, but the district one, her cooperating teacher told her to walk around the room, and if she saw that students were getting items on the test wrong, she was supposed to point out to them, you might want to look at this one again. Not giving them the answer, but definitely cheating and definitely violating some sort of ethical guidelines that could get her in serious trouble because those district tests are used in high stakes situations in curricular mapping and things like that. So the ethical questions that might come up can be satisfied, according to Popham, by thinking about two principles. One is professional ethics and norms. Basically, does what you're doing violate any common sense ethical norms of the day? In other words, is everybody else doing it, right? If everybody else is doing it, it's probably okay, right? The second one is educational defensibility, meaning that is whatever I'm doing going to raise test scores without actually raising ability? In other words, will I increase standard error and inflate what the students are getting to systematically overestimate what they should be getting and introduce some sort of bias into my test scores? These are the two fundamental principles, and Popham talks about 5 common preparation practices. I will want you to understand these two principles, and I will want you to understand what these common preparation practices are. The first is previous form preparation, where you get your hands on some old tests to practice with, and you use them as models or templates in terms of content and format, and you use that to shape your curriculum to better prepare your students. A second is current form preparation, where you basically get a hand on the current test and the answers, and you rehearse them with your students so they're more likely to get them right when they take the test. A third is generalized test-taking preparation, which is about educated guessing, time management, and so on, how to approach essays, how to approach multiple choice, things like that. How to stay focused, how to motivate yourself, how to deal with fatigue. The fourth is same format preparation, meaning that if you are going to be taking multiple choice tests, you drill and practice answering multiple choice questions all the time in your class. Again, modifying your curriculum and teaching to the test, so to speak, realizing that you are not really preparing your students for the real world, in which you don't typically take multiple choice tests. Finally, there is varied format preparation, in which you prepare them by giving them all kinds of different test formats, multiple choice, essay, short answer, and so on. And in this case, you are doing a good job preparing. So Popham has this table where he says whether or not he thinks that each one of these practices either violates or satisfies the ethical guidelines. He states that previous form preparation practices are not satisfying professional ethics. In other words, other people don't do it and it's not considered an okay practice. And educational defensibility is not acceptable. Now, this depends on how you read previous form preparation. If you have a hands-on curriculum and you know your students are taking a multiple choice test that's going to have a Scantron and all that stuff, you may practice going over, this is what the questions are like. Here you're going to have a passage like this. These are the kinds of questions they're going to ask, just so they're not totally caught by surprise. In that case, it should be fine in both cases because people do this. It's common practice, and it's educationally defensible because you won't be letting the testing context interfere with the student's ability to answer the questions. When I give you practice tests in this class, it's because the test is going to be in a given format that doesn't always match what we do in class. You might not be prepared for it, so I want you not to be thrown by how I'm asking the questions, but just really focusing on whether or not you can answer them. Current form preparation, of course, satisfies neither because it is cheating pure and simple. Giving people the answers, even though you're not telling them they're going to be on the test, isn't okay. So you have to make sure that you don't get involved in anything like that. You also have generalized test taking, which is okay in both guidelines. It's okay from a professional ethics standpoint. Everybody does some kind of coaching on how to take a test. And then it also satisfies educational defensibility because it isn't going to artificially inflate test scores. Same format via preparation, he says, is okay in that people do it, where they give people the same content, same format, ask questions in the same way. However, he says that it is not educationally defensible. And here I don't know if I agree 100% with this. I think that this raising test scores based on helping people understand the specific format probably isn't 100% true in all cases. I can see how it could be, but I don't think that it would be in every case. And so I think that the same format preparation, especially if that's not all what you're doing, but say you take some time out of your semester, your curriculum, to focus on that, that's okay. If you modify your entire school year to just mirror the test, that's not okay. And that makes sense that this would not satisfy educational defensibility. Finally, we have varied format preparation, meaning teaching students how to approach different content from different formats. Makes sense, and it's okay ethically. It's also educationally defensible. So basically, what I want you to be able to do with these is, one, understand what these principles are, two, be able to identify when one of these things is occurring. So I'm going to go through a few examples. So example one, because she is eager for her students to perform well on their 12th grade senior mathematics test, administered by the State Department of Education, Mrs. Williamson gives students answer keys for all of the test's selected response items. When her students take the test in the school auditorium along with all the school's other 12th graders, she urges them to use the answer key discreetly and only if necessary. Okay. First question, what type of test preparation is this, if any? And this is, of course, the same form or current form preparation. It does violate professional ethics, and it does violate educational defensibility. Again, giving students answers is not okay in any circumstance. Example 2. We have Mrs. Hilliard. She's a reading teacher, and she knows that the reading section of the state test has these 6 different passages, and they're supposed to have or address these particular skills: the main idea of the selection as a whole, the meaning of the selection's technical terms based on context clues, and the defensibility of inferential statements linked to that selection. Okay, so there's this test, and it has these different characteristics. She routinely spends time in her 8th grade class trying to improve her students' reading comprehension capabilities. Makes sense, it's language arts. She has the students read passages similar to those used in the statewide test, then gives her students a variety of practice tests, including written multiple choice, true, false, and oral short answer tests in which, for example, individual students must state what they believe to be the main idea of a specific paragraph in the passage. Now, the first question is, what type of test preparation is this, if any? Now, you could say that this is same format, meaning that she is mirroring what this particular thing does, but she is giving them a variety of different things, so it's much closer to varied format, even though the general prompt is kind of the same. She's giving them the same kinds of tasks, still going after these basic skills, right? And so you could argue a lot of different things here. And I think that in this case, because it's a language arts class, and because she's varying her responses, even though she is having them read these things, right? What else are you going to do in a language arts class? I think this most closely falls into a varied format test preparation practice. Does it violate professional ethics? I would say no. Popham says no. Does it violate educational defensibility? The idea here is no as well. So it's okay. Again, the things to focus on, she's giving them different or varied formats. She's not coaching them in terms of time management, educated guessing. So it's not generalized test taking. And so you probably want to lean or focus on, 1, the format, 2, what the main purpose is, and 3, whether or not it's actually mirroring one of the previous tests. Example 3, Mr. Tippy decided to ensure he gets his performance bonus, 2,000 big ones, by making sure that his students do well in the standardized test. To do this, he raises his own classroom standards, assigns more homework, and uses every trick in his book to get his students to learn the material. The day of the test, he has them meditate for 15 minutes prior to the exam to clear their heads. What type of test preparation is this, if any? Well, the answer here is it's not really any specific type that Popham talks about. He's not looking at previous or current forms. He's not giving them generalized test-taking tips. He's not practicing with either specific forms that are going to be used on the test or varied forms. And so it doesn't really fall into any category, and that's okay. So you could say none or none of the above. Question, does it violate professional ethics? In other words, is this something, in other words, raising your standards and demanding more from your students, is this acceptable? Absolutely. Is this educationally defensible? In other words, is this going to inflate test scores above what students actually know? The answer is here, no, it does not violate educational defensibility. And so it doesn't matter that he's doing it because he wants to make money. People don't worry about the motivation of the person. That has nothing to do with it. Ultimately, what you're asking is it okay in the profession, and does it artificially inflate test scores? This is just getting kids to learn more, right? So any increase in their test scores will be because they actually learned more. Final example. Mr. Higgins decides that he is not going to let the students in his class who always forget to take their medication and who never put forth any effort to drag down his class test scores this year because the scores never reflect their true ability. He decides that he will excuse them from taking the test and simply indicate that they were non-compliant. In other words, they wouldn't take it. What type of test preparation is this, if any? Again, the answer is none. Does it violate professional ethics? Absolutely. This is not okay. This could be the subject of a 2020 or frontline investigation. And does this violate educational defensibility? The answer is yes. It will inflate artificially the test scores of his class, even though the individuals who take the test won't have an inflation in their scores. His class as a whole will have an inflated set of scores or an inflated average. So those are the types of questions I'm going to be asking you on the exam. There will be 3 of them. There will be 2 that are pretty vanilla in the sense that they're basic and straight to the point. And then there will be one that is a little trickier that doesn't necessarily fit into any one category, and you will have to try to figure it out. So that's what you can expect. It's a pretty short section of the test. Again, only 3 questions. Hopefully this will help. And if you have any questions, let me know.